Before we go anywhere tonight, I want to ask you something simple. Where are you watching this from right now? Like, actually, drop your city, your country right now in the comments below. I genuinely read every single one. Every single one. It blows my mind every time I see how far this reaches. And hey, what time is it where you are right now? Like, seriously, what time are you watching this? Drop that too. Are you up way too late? Eating lunch? On your commute? Tell me. I want to know. Today's like goal is just 10 likes. That is it. 10. If you enjoy what we do here, if this kind of story keeps you up at night in the best possible way, 10 likes is all I am asking. That is it. That is the whole deal. And if you are new here, welcome. This channel goes deep on real documented mysteries, the kind that happen to real people in real places that nobody talks about enough. If that sounds like your kind of thing, hit subscribe. You belong here. Alright, now let me take you somewhere. It is just past 2 in the morning. The air is thick. What? The kind of heat that does not break even when the sun goes down. The kind of night where sound carries differently, where every snapped branch, every shift in the underbrush, arrives just a half-second too late for you to be sure of where it came from. 2 security guards are posted at the perimeter of a facility on the northern edge of Cebu Island. This is not their first night on this rotation. They know this property. They know its sounds. They know the difference between a dog moving through the fence line and something else. At 2:14 in the morning, both guards stopped walking at the exact same moment. Neither of them said a word to the other. They both just stopped. Because standing at the tree line, perfectly still, perfectly silent, in the space between the floodlight and the dark, was a shape. Not an animal. Not a person. Something that was almost both. So what did they actually see? Now, before we get to exactly what those guards described that night, I want to make sure you understand where this happened. Because the location matters. The history of this island matters. And if you understand both of those things, what comes later is going to hit very differently. Cebu is one of the most historically layered islands in the entire Philippine archipelago. It sits in the Visayas region, roughly in the geographic center of the Philippines. Population of over 3 million people on the island proper. One of the oldest cities in Southeast Asia sits on its coast. Ferdinand Magellan landed here in 1521. The Spanish built their colonial strongholds here. The Second World War tore through here with a brutality that left entire communities fractured for generations. But long before the Spanish arrived, long before any colonial power drew a line on any map, the indigenous Visayan people who lived on Cebu had already built a complete cosmology. A complete understanding of what the world contained, including the parts of it that could not be easily explained. They called one of those things the Sigbin. Let that word sit for a moment. The Sigbin appears in pre-colonial Philippine oral tradition as a creature that walks backward, that drains vitality from sleeping humans, that can become invisible at will, and that is most active, most present, in the hours between midnight and dawn. Accounts of it were not treated as myth or superstition. They were treated as practical knowledge. The kind of knowledge that kept people alive if they took it seriously. The facility where these guards were stationed sits adjacent to a stretch of forested hillside on Cebu's northern corridor. The specific grove of trees bordering that property has been referenced in local barangay records going back further than the current structure itself. And none of that background would matter at all. If it were not for the fact that on a documented night in the early hours of the morning, 2 trained security professionals, men whose entire job is to observe accurately and report honestly, saw something at that tree line that they could not explain and have never fully explained since. But it was not just these 2 men. His name is Reinaldo. He had been working security for 11 years by the time this happened. 11 years of night shifts, perimeter checks, logging entries and exits, watching nothing move in the dark so that he could report accurately that nothing moved. He was not a man prone to storytelling. His colleagues describe him as methodical, quiet, the kind of person whose reports were always filed on time and always accurate. He was 41 years old. He had a wife and 2 children in a barangay about 20 minutes from the facility. He had worked this same rotation, the overnight 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., for going on 3 years. He knew this property the way you know a room you have lived in for a decade. On the night in question, Reinaldo and his partner were conducting their standard 2 a.m. perimeter walk. The walk takes approximately 18 minutes on a complete circuit. They were roughly 11 minutes in, coming around the northeastern corner of the property, which faces the tree line directly, when Reinaldo's partner stopped first. Reinaldo later described this moment in a recorded conversation with a local researcher affiliated with the Philippine Folklore Documentation Project based in Cebu City. He said, and I am reconstructing this from that recorded account, "My partner grabbed my arm. He did not say anything. He just grabbed my arm and I already knew before I turned my head, that something was wrong with the direction he was looking." Reinaldo turned. At the edge of the floodlight, right at the precise boundary where the light gives way to full dark, there was a shape standing in the gap between 2 large trees. He described it as tall. Taller than a person, but not dramatically so. The proportions were wrong in ways that were hard to put into words. The shoulders were too wide relative to the lower body. The head was set lower than it should have been, not like someone hunching forward, but as if the neck simply placed it differently than a human neck would. The arms were visible but were hanging at an angle that did not correspond to how a human arm hangs when a person is standing still. It was not moving. It was just present. Reinaldo said he counted. He actually counted in his head to measure how long it stood there. He counted to 9 before anything changed. And what changed was not that it ran, not that it flinched, not that it responded to the floodlight at all. What changed was that it was simply no longer there. No movement away. No retreat into the brush. No sound of anything departing. The space where it had been standing was empty, and Reinaldo could not tell you, and said clearly that he could not tell you, when exactly the transition happened. Only that he had been looking directly at it, and then he was looking at the tree line, and the 2 states had no moment of change between them. His partner did not speak for what Reinaldo estimated as 4 full minutes. When he finally did speak, he said only one thing. He said, "You saw that too?" And Reinaldo said yes. And neither of them moved for another 3 minutes after that. Pause with me for 1 second right here, because I want to know what you think. Right now, before we go any further, drop it in the comments. Was this psychological? Was it an animal? Was it something that already had a name in this culture long before these men were born? Which one? I want to see the camps form. Tell me what you think happened. I will be reading every single response. All right. Because here is where it gets harder to explain away. It is 2:14 in the morning on Cebu Island. The air temperature is approximately 27 degrees Celsius. There is no wind. The floodlights on the northeastern corner of the property are functioning normally. There is no equipment failure reported before or after this incident. The cameras covering the main building entrance are running. The segment of perimeter where this encounter occurs is not covered by an active camera feed, a fact that will matter later. Reinaldo and his partner are standing 8 meters apart at the moment the shape appears. 8 meters is not a small distance. These are 2 separate men in 2 separate positions with 2 separate angles of view. Both of them see it. The shape stands at what Reinaldo estimates as 12 to 14 meters from their position, close enough to make out the outline clearly, far enough that the details bleed at the edges. The floodlight behind them throws their shadows forward and illuminates the near ground. The trees beyond that lit ground are in darkness. The shape is in the transition zone. Not fully in the dark. Not fully in the light. In the precise threshold between them. Reinaldo's right hand moves to his radio. He does not key it. He will later say that he did not key the radio because he was afraid that the sound of his own voice would cause it to move. That if it moved, if it closed the 12 meters between them, he did not know what he would do. His partner is completely still. The shape does not breathe with any rhythm Reinaldo can detect. He watches the upper body for movement, for the subtle rise and fall that any living thing produces when it draws air. He sees nothing consistent. He sees what he describes as a slight, irregular shift in the outline, not a breath, more like a vibration, as if whatever is producing the shape is not entirely stable in the way it occupies space. It does not acknowledge the light. Animals, when caught in artificial light, respond to it. Their eyes reflect it. They freeze, or they flee, or they turn their heads toward the source. This shape does none of those things. The light falls on it and the shape simply remains, as if the light is a phenomenon happening in a world it is only partially connected to. Reinaldo counts to 9. On 9 it is gone. No sound of movement. No crashing through brush. No snap of branches underfoot. The forest does not react the way it reacts when something large moves through it. The birds that had gone quiet, and Reinaldo notes specifically that the birds had gone quiet at some point before either of them noticed the shape, though neither could say exactly when. The birds remain quiet for several minutes after the shape disappears. The immediate aftermath is this. Both men walk back to the guard station without speaking. Reinaldo logs the time in the incident book. He writes in the notes field, "Unusual presence observed at northeast tree line. No identification possible. No engagement." He does not write what he actually saw. He told the researcher later that he did not know which words to use. His partner goes into the staff bathroom and does not come out for 11 minutes. Neither of them is laughed at by their colleagues when the following morning, the night shift debrief takes an unexpected turn, because it turns out it was not only these two men. The researcher who documented Reinaldo's account, a cultural anthropologist connected to the University of San Carlos in Cebu City, who has spent over a decade collecting and cross-referencing anomalous encounter reports from the Visayas region, did not find Reinaldo by accident. She found him because Reinaldo was the fourth person from that same general corridor of northern Cebu to give her a substantively similar account within an 18-month window. Let me walk you through those accounts, because individually each one is easy to question, but together. The first account she documented came from a farmer, a man in his late 50s, who works land bordering the same stretch of hillside forest. His encounter did not happen at night. It happened at dusk. He was walking his field boundary when he became aware of a shape standing at the edge of the tree line. He describes the same disproportionate silhouette, the same quality of absolute stillness. He is a man who has lived adjacent to that forest his entire life. He has never, before or since, described any experience like it. He told the researcher he did not report it to anyone for almost a year because he could not think of anyone who would know what to do with the information. The second account came from a group of 3 young men, teenagers at the time, who were returning from a family event in the hours after midnight. They were traveling by motorbike along the road that skirts the western edge of the same forested area. All 3 of them described seeing something standing in the roadside brush that was too large to be a dog and too still to be a person waiting for a ride. One of the 3 stopped his bike. The other 2 describe him stopping and then immediately starting again and driving without stopping until they reached the next barangay. When they asked him later why he stopped and then immediately left, he said he did not want to answer. He has never fully described what he saw in those seconds while he was stopped. The third account is different in character and comes from a different kind of source entirely. It is a written record, not a testimony. A log entry from a barangay community watch rotation, dated several years prior to the others, noting that a volunteer watchman reported an unidentified presence near the tree line of a named Sidio, a name that corresponds geographically to the same cluster of forest. The log entry itself is mundane. The language is procedural. But the notation at the bottom, added in different handwriting, reads, "Watchman resigned from rotation following this report. Reason given, personal." And then there is the pre-war record. In the ethnographic collection of the Museo Sugbo, Cebu's provincial museum, there are documented accounts, gathered by Spanish-era friars and later by American colonial period anthropologists, of indigenous Visayan communities in this region maintaining specific taboos around a particular stretch of hillside terrain. The taboos are not explained in the records. They are simply noted as long-standing community practice. This area at night is not entered. Not by hunters. Not during festivals. Not for any reason. The same terrain. Separated from Reynaldo's incident by over a century of recorded history. Described in completely different cultural and linguistic frameworks. Arriving at the same conclusion. Do not go there at night. Whatever these guards saw at the tree line was not new. Now I want to be careful here, because I think the worst thing I can do is tell you what to believe. What I can do is walk you through the 4 most credible explanations that serious researchers have applied to accounts like this one. Night shift work is genuinely hard on human cognition. The research on this is not ambiguous. Disrupted circadian rhythms, chronic mild sleep deprivation, extended periods of low stimulus vigilance followed by sudden alertness. These are documented conditions that affect perception. The brain, under these conditions, is known to perform what researchers call pareidolia at an elevated rate, the tendency to perceive meaningful shapes and patterns in ambiguous visual data. A half-lit tree line at 2 in the morning is exactly the kind of environment where this effect is most pronounced. The problem with this explanation, as neat as it is the simultaneity. 2 men 8 meters apart, different angles, perceiving the same specific shape with the same specific proportions at the same specific moment, and then, separately, for other individuals across an 18-month period describing an encounter in the same geographic area with substantively similar characteristics. Shared psychological phenomenon requires shared psychological conditions. The conditions here were not shared. The Philippine archipelago contains a genuinely extraordinary range of fauna, some of which is not yet fully documented in the scientific literature. The Philippine flying lemur, the colugo, can produce surprisingly large silhouettes at certain distances. The Visayan warty pig, the Philippine deer, large monitor lizards displaced from their ranges by habitat disruption. These are real animals in this environment. Misidentification in low light is not an unreasonable possibility, except for the behavior. Nothing in the documented wildlife of this region produces a silhouette with the shoulder width and the head-to-torso geometry that multiple witnesses independently described. Nothing in the documented wildlife of this region stands completely still in artificial light for 9 or more counted seconds and then vanishes without producing sound or movement in the surrounding brush. And nothing in the documented wildlife of this region has inspired multigenerational community taboos about specific stretches of terrain. A person, someone on the property boundary for reasons that had nothing to do with the supernatural. A trespasser, a person in distress, a local community member cutting through the property at night, a person whose posture and body language read as strange due to injury, intoxication, or intentional concealment. This is actually the explanation that Reinaldo himself says he wanted to believe most, because it is the most manageable one. But it does not account for the departure. A person crouching and moving away through brush at night produces sound. The forest would react. The birds, which were already silent, would have reacted to movement on the ground. None of that happened. And here is where I want you to sit with something for a moment. The Sigbin in Philippine indigenous cosmology is not a modern invention. It is not a social media creation. It is not a piece of internet folklore that got attached retroactively to a security guard's encounter report. It is a documented entity in pre-colonial Visayan oral tradition, recorded by Spanish missionaries in the 16th and 17th centuries who encountered these beliefs among communities that had no reference point for European supernatural traditions. The physical description in those early records, the disproportionate silhouette, the unusual posture, the capacity for sudden absence, the association with specific terrain and specific hours, maps onto what Reinaldo described with a degree of specificity that is genuinely difficult to dismiss. And if Theory 4 contains any truth, then the most unsettling implication is not what these guards saw. The most unsettling implication is that it was there long before the facility was built on that land. Long before anyone put a floodlight at the edge of that tree line. Long before any security rotation walked that perimeter. It was already there. None of these four theories fully accounts for what multiple trained, sober, credible observers described. None of them closes the question. And that is the honest answer. Stay with me right here, please. Because the final account I am about to share with you, the one that the researcher almost did not publish because of what it implied about the consistency of these sightings across time, is unlike anything we have covered so far in this video. If you have made it this far, thank you. Genuinely. This kind of content takes real research and real care to put together, and the fact that you are still here means everything. Hit that like button right now if this story has you thinking. It takes 2 seconds and it makes a real difference. Now, the final account. The researcher's name is Dr. Maribel Castaños. She is a cultural anthropologist. She has published peer-reviewed work on indigenous cosmological frameworks in the Visayas. She is not a paranormal investigator. She is not a content creator. She has never described her work as anything other than documentation and analysis of living cultural knowledge. She did not set out to document a series of anomalous sightings near a forested hillside in northern Cebu. She set out to document how pre-colonial spiritual geography, the Visayan understanding of which places carry which kinds of significance, had survived or transformed under centuries of colonial and post-colonial disruption. The tree line that Reynaldo and his partner were watching that night falls within what Dr. Castanos' research identifies as a documented lugar, a place. In indigenous Visayan geography, certain locations carry designations that function almost like warnings built into the landscape itself. They are not recorded on any government map. They are not marked with signs. They exist as knowledge passed from one generation to the next in the oral tradition of the community that lives adjacent to them. The lugar that corresponds to this property boundary had, according to Dr. Castanos' interviews with 3 separate community elders, none of whom had spoken with each other about this specific topic before she brought them into the research, been designated as such for as long as anyone in the living memory of that community could trace. None of the elders could name a time when that stretch of hillside was considered ordinary. It had always been this. One of the elders, a woman in her early 80s, a respected figure in her barangay, a person whose family has farmed adjacent land for at least 4 generations, said something during her interview that Dr. Castanos has cited in her subsequent writing. She said, paraphrased from the recorded interview, "The place is not dangerous because something comes to it. The place is what it is because whatever is there does not leave. It does not come and go. It simply remains. And sometimes it becomes visible. And sometimes it does not. But it is always there." Dr. Castanos cross-referenced this elder's account against the earliest documentary evidence she could find for that specific terrain designation. The oldest written reference she located came from a Spanish-era document, a missionary's report held in an archive in Manila, undated but assessed by archivists as originating in the late 18th century, that described local inhabitants' reluctance to enter a stretch of forested hillside on the northern interior of Cebu. The missionary interpreted this reluctance as superstition to be corrected. He noted it. He did not understand it. He noted it in 17. The document's final line on the subject reads, and the archival translation is imperfect here, something close to, "I entered the forest myself to demonstrate to them that there was nothing. I do not record here what I found as I do not yet have the language adequate to describe it. I will address this matter in a subsequent report." There is no subsequent report. Here is the question that I cannot stop thinking about. Reinaldo is a trained observer. 11 years of professional vigilance. His entire job is to be accurate, to see what is actually there and report it without embellishment. When someone like that tells you something moved in the dark that he could not identify, you have to decide what to do with that. You can decide that the training is irrelevant. that the human brain under night shift conditions will generate false positives regardless of experience. That is a defensible position. Or you can decide that training matters. That a man who has spent 11 years distinguishing between a dog, a person, a shadow, and nothing, knows the difference. And that what he is telling you is that what he saw was none of those things. The problem is that both of those decisions leave you in the same place. Because even if every single one of these accounts is a misperception, there is still the elder's testimony. There is still the missionary's unfinished report. There is still the Barangay Community Watch log. There is still the teenager who stopped his motorbike and then drove without stopping for reasons he has never fully explained. And there is still the Lugar. The place that was not ordinary before the facility was built. Before the floodlights were installed. Before the security rotation began. Before any of these men were born. So I want to ask you something directly. And I want you to actually think about it before you answer. If a place has been considered significant, considered present in a way that ordinary places are not, by every generation of people who have lived adjacent to it for as far back as documentation reaches, does that make the accounts more credible? Or does it only mean that fear, once attached to a place, reproduces itself across time regardless of cause? I genuinely do not know the answer to that, and I think that is the honest place to end. Because the guards who filed that night's log went back to work the following evening. They walked the same perimeter. They checked the same fence line. They stood at 2 a.m. at the same northeastern corner facing the same tree line. Reinaldo said he never saw it again. He also said he never stopped looking. Now I want to hear from you. Which theory do you believe? Psychological? Wildlife? Human presence? Or something that already had a name on this island long before anyone built a fence around that property? Drop it in the comments right now. I read every single one. Every one. Let's actually talk about this. We set a goal of 10 likes at the start of this video. If we crossed it, that is you. That is your support. That is what keeps this channel going. If we have not crossed it yet, this is your moment. 2 seconds. That is all. Next time we go somewhere completely different. A different war. A different continent. A mystery that government spent 60 years pretending did not happen, until a document release forced them to admit that something had been seen, and something had been filed, and something had never been explained. Subscribe so you do not miss it. I will see you in the dark.